going to start. We've got John Bones. My name's Alastair. I'm from GIJN, and Gina from Colombia, who's trying to log on. What we'll do is we'll just run through. I'll allow my two colleagues to speak, and then I'll do a short one, and then we'll have a couple of minutes. We'll keep a couple of minutes over at the end for questions. We have a microphone in the corner there, which we can use. This room is being streamed, so we have to use the microphones. And if you don't want to be streamed, especially the back of your head, bear that in mind.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, this is not projecting? Yes, it is. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Giannina Segnini. I'm from Costa Rica, and I'm the director of the data journalism degree at Columbia University in New York. So I was asked to, quite a challenge, to go and see what happened this year in data journalism around the world, and particularly in Latin America, the US, and Asia. So the first thing I have to say is the criteria that I used is, well, obviously, you know, awards are an important indicator, but also, you know, the topics that are more relevant around the world. And the first thing that I noticed is this is 2019, and we're still primarily covering stories about dead people, pretty much, and you will see why. This is the story that got more and the most important awards in data journalism. First place in the Global Data Journalism Awards, first place in Latin American Investigation, and also Philip Meyer Award, the IRE Award. And it's quite unusual because what they did during the Hurricane Maria, what they did is, right in the moment when everything was happening, two amazing investigative reporters went out to start, you know, to document every single death around the country. They were doing this, you know, all around the island during the crisis, so it's a real-time investigation, but also later, they used other techniques. They collected hundreds of cases by interviewing people. And later, they sued the government to request all the dead people, public records on dead people, after starting from the day of the hurricane. And what they found is that the governor, I mean, they were totally you know, lying about the number of people who died in the hurricane. They documented 500 victims who died during the hurricane. It was devastating in Puerto Rico. And they cross-referenced everything. I mean, they went through every single dead person and were able to prove that the governor was lying, and also President Trump, who was trying to minimize the effect. This was just published a month ago. It's an amazing effort to document, again, every single death related to drugs in the Philippines. As you know, Duterte, the president, is calling for a war against drugs, and that has been used as an excuse to kill many people. Again, there was an underestimation of the number of drug-related killings in the Philippines. They built a list of fatalities based on 23 different sources and visited all the communities. Most of the, this is covering 2 years in 4 municipalities in the Philippines. So going to the US. In the past decade, more than 26,000 murders have gone without an arrest in major American cities. And the most surprising finding, this is the Washington Post, is that most of them were, 3/4 of them were black. So there's a total correlation between, deaths or killings that go, murders that go impunity without any kind of arrest or investigation, and race. To do this, I mean, they spent quite a while documenting, police records, local news, and again, multiple sources to build the database. And the analysis covered more than 50,000 unsolved cases. So, more dead people. This time in Venezuela. This is a really amazing effort because, as you guys know, Venezuela is under a real crisis. And the government, again, you see the pattern. The excuse is that they're going to fight crime, and so the Venezuelan government created a special operation called OLP, which is Operation to Liberate and Protect the People. So as in the other cases, reporters went, house by house, documented 44 massacres committed by the OLP program. They basically, what they did is, replacing criminal groups by what they call colectivos, which is a government-supported civic groups. And here, I mean, in all these cases, we're talking about data that is being used to find patterns and trends. But as in the other cases, most of this data is collected, manually, doing reporting on the field. Sorry, this is more dead people. This is an amazing effort in Mexico. So in Mexico, there are mass graves that the government and the government, not just the federal government, but also state governments document, but they don't recognize all of them. So what they did is they went through 32 different states, Mexican states, requesting for public information, and then they went to verify every one of these cases. They created a database with all the medical records and forensic records in each of those, and of course the findings is that there is a mass grave created every 2 days in Mexico, which is a really surprising finding. Okay, this is not from this year. Mother Jones started back in 2012, documenting mass shootings across the United States. And now they're referenced, I mean, this database that they have been since then feeding and updating manually. Actually, if you go to, I mean, this poor guy, Mark, every time there's a mass shooting, he's like, I hate to keep doing this work again and again. Sometimes, as last month, there were 2 mass shootings. And what they are doing is they're documenting pretty much every single mass shooting. There have been 115 mass shootings in the past 4 decades, and most of them of the findings. So this is not just counting dead people, but what they did is they have been documenting 2 variables that not many people were documenting. One is the source of the weapons. And what they found is that most of the weapons were obtained legally in all these mass shootings. Then the perpetrators, more than half of these cases involved school or workplace shootings. And 44 of the killers were white males. Only 1 woman was a perpetrator. By the way, they keep documenting, updating this database all the time, and it's downloadable if you want to have access to it. This is a different approach. The Washington Post did this story that took around a year, and so instead of documenting killings, what they did is a very interesting methodology. What they did is reported how many kids were exposed to gun violence in the United States. So the methodology pretty much was identifying every act of gunfire that occurred during or after, right after class, since Columbine in '99. And the results is that more than 200,000 kids have been exposed to these kind of mass shootings. And just, I mean, to give an example, this is the entire population of Salt Lake City. In Brazil, the government, the army is functioning as the police. So Publica, which is a nonprofit investigative outlet in Brazil, they documented all the killings. You know, every time that a person is killed in a favela in Brazil, there's a common understanding that this person was somehow involved in organized crime or a crime group or something. So what they did is that they went through all these killings, they talked to relatives, they looked into the criminal cases, and they found that at least 32 people had nothing to do with any kind of crime. So that it's collateral damage, and that's how. That's the name of the project. By the way, it's they're one of the finalists for the awards that are going to be announced tonight. See, the thing with this investigation is that they proved that these people not were only killed, but their reputation was also destroyed after they died. Because the government claims that all these killings had to do with, that they are all criminals, which is not the case, as they were able to prove. This is a project from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in the UK. And what they did is, again, counting dead people, in this case, homeless people across the UK. And they did this because no government agency ever was counting, you know, how many homeless people were dying on the streets. And again, this is not just counting dead people, but they were able to find some trends. They also documented the cause of the death, and they were able to prove that most of these deaths could have been prevented. And they were all treatable illness, such as tuberculosis, pneumonia, gastric problems, and etc. So this is a collaborative work that they did in association with, during 1 year with many partners all across the UK. Going back to Mexico, this is the data journalism portal in Mexico, and so they documented all the homicides in Mexico starting in 2015. And they were able to prove that, you know, the monthly homicide rate in Mexico more than doubled from 2015 to 2018, and this is quite historic. Also, the visualization and the data analysis shows that this violence has been expanding all across the country in places where there was not this level of violence before. Okay, I'm done with the dead people. Yeah, I know it's depressing, but so the other trend in data journalism this year is health and climate change related data projects. So I chose a couple of them. This is probably the most relevant investigation data investigation in the US in terms of covering the opioid epidemic. The Washington Post has been covering this in depth, and what they did is first they went to federal court and they sued the government. You know, all these pharmaceutical companies who control and lobby heavily in the U.S. There's a database called ARCOS that is collected by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and that tracks all the manufacture and distribution of prescription drugs, including oxycodone, hydrocodone, you know, pain killers all across the country, starting in 2006 till 2012. This data was denied multiple times, so the Post hired a group of lawyers who have been fighting in court, and finally they got this, and they were able to prove that only 6 companies are distributing 70% of the pills during this period of time. This is, as you might know, one of the main health problems in the US, and the database was made public as well, so you can download it from their website. And of course, implant files. How many of you guys worked in the implant files? Okay. So ICIJ came up with this amazing investigation that tracked all the medical devices that have been tested inadequately or not tested at all. So they were able to prove more than 1.7 million injuries and nearly 83,000 deaths suspected of being linked to medical devices over the last decade. 250 journalists worked in this project, and it involved collecting data in multiple jurisdictions across the world. And this has a really important component because they created this database of all these medical devices that were reported as failing, and people can go and check if their device is listed and if there was any death or injury or report related to the device. They used a machine learning algorithm to screen millions of reports across the world. This is a project that was published by Reuters, and it's also one of the finalists in the Data Journalism Awards for the category of Data Investigation of the Year. And it started, I don't know how many of you guys know Maurice Taman from Reuters. So the guy lives literally in a boat in the Hudson River in New York. And so he noticed that there were fish that did not belong to this part of the ocean, that belonged to the south. So he wondered what was happening, and then he spent an entire year collecting data from multiple sources. So Ocean Shock proved that nearly 70 species of marine creatures have been migrating north across the world. Japan, so it's not just the US, but it involved, you know, everything from the US to Africa and Japan. And you know, the use of data here is particularly creative because so it's not just analyzing one data set, but combining, you know, temperature and all the data that the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration collects on species migration. And this guy don't want. Okay, something happened. Oh, no, it's the end. All right, thank you very much.
German speaking.
Shift FM.
15, 5. No. I don't understand language.
Hello. You can hear me? Yes, good. I'm John Bonis. I'm the Managing Director at SKUP, the Norwegian Foundation for Investigative Reporting. We are one of the 182 member organizations at this network, and we have hosted this conference twice, both in 2008 and 2015. In my part of the world, which is close to Hamburg, we communicate a lot with our neighbors in Sweden and Denmark because our languages are almost similar. Finnish is a bit more complicated, but they have Swedish is a minority language in Finland, and I'm going to show you some examples from all these countries. The first project I'm going to show you was published by the Norwegian broadcaster NRK, and this title means check the property tax in your neighborhood. It took more than two years from they started this project until it was published. When this work started, there were 428 municipalities in Norway, and 288 of these municipalities have property tax. But how much do each house owner pay? This is a decision made by local authorities. The NRK person who did this job, his name is Espen Andersen. He sent the FOIA request to all these 288 municipalities, and 254 of them answered NRK. The different municipalities are using different methods when they are calculating the tax. Some municipalities used a few days to answer the request, and some try to keep the data as a military secret. And some did not answer at all. According to the Norwegian law, these data are official, but many municipalities don't care about the law. And that's a problem in Norway. And when NRK got this data, they were in quite different formats. And very few of them were in Excel format. Espen Andersen had to develop some new techniques to make the rinsing of this data. And he faced problems he had not thought about when he started the project. There could be several properties at the same address, and one property could be at several addresses. Anyway, he started this was published in the beginning of August this year. And this is how it worked. This is my street, and I typed in my address and my municipality. And then I could see how much property tax all the neighbors in my area is paying in property tax. And if I find that the neighbor is paying less than me, I can complain to the municipality. This is an example of ved taxation. The title means the taxation shock. And the owner of this housing says, this cottage is so rotten that it is impossible to make it burn. Anyway, the taxation is 100,000 euros. This means that the title means that the property tax was quadrupled, and this happened before they had made a new taxation, which is against the law. And this story is about one city who had been sabotaging to give information. So how could NRK know this? because by a mistake, the municipality forwarded intern mails to NRK, when they, after 1 year, was forced to give access to the data. This picture is showing the secretary at the Norwegian Editors Association, and he says that the responsible person would have been fired if he had done this kind of sabotage in a private company. Yeah. So then Sweden. The Swedish television would like to find out what kind of people who could see the different ads at Facebook. They studied the ads from the election last year until May this year. In total, 4,000 ads. Each point in this graph is showing one ad, and to understand the graph, you should know this. To the left are ads mainly shown to men, and to the right, ads mainly shown to women. Up, older people, and down, young people. And it also was possible to filter on geography. And you could check the different parties, what kind of ads people got in their feed. This example is showing ads from the big Conservative Party, and the main finding is that men in their 40s can see many of these ads. And by clicking at one of the points in this visualization, you can see the ads, like I've done here. And these three examples are about the Social Democrat Party to the left, the right-wing populist party, Swedish Democrats in the middle, and the feminist party to the right. The ads you can see here is what I got when I clicked at the points in the visualization. So how did that journalist find out this? They built a scraper, and it searched the names of the parties and the 10 persons at the top of the list. More Sweden. This is a mapping Swedish television did after the last elections. And this mapping is showing the political color of Sweden. Red is Social Democrats, blue is Conservative, around Stockholm area to the right, and yellow is Sweden Democrats, many of them in the southwest. And they also made a grid version comparing the difference in votes between 2014 and 2018. And income. The general election in Sweden was September last year, and it took more than 3 months before they could have a new government. This is because Sweden has positive parliamentarism, meaning that a majority of the parliament has to accept a new government. So it has, so it was difficult to make a new government because nobody would like to cooperate with the Swedish right-wing Swedish Democrats, who got more than 17% of the votes. So Swedish television, they made an interactive sort of play where the readers could try to figure out how they could build a majority. To the left, you can see that the Conservative bloc gets 41%, and the Social Democrat bloc get 41.3%. So nobody of them has a majority. So the solution was that two other centrist parties jumped from the Conservative bloc to the Social Democrat bloc, and finally Sweden got their government. And here is another example from Swedish television. It's about the income and the income gap in the Swedish municipalities. They made this by building 2 data sets for every municipality. One data set has historic data, one has the situation right now. All the data comes from Statistics Sweden, a government agency who brings official stats to the public. In this project, they used automatic writing and automatic presentation. For each municipality, they published 2 graphs and a text explaining the situation. So here you can see the difference between Malmö, a big city in the south, and Gothenburg. And to translate this text, this automatic written text, Malmö, the median income in 2017 was 215,700. That's approximately 15% lower than the average in Sweden. Between 2011 and 2017, the income increased with 14% in this municipality. That's a better development compared with the whole country, which was 13%. And they created this text for all the Swedish municipalities. And now a couple of examples from Finland. As I told you, Finns have their own language, not related to the other Nordic languages at all. However, a minority is speaking Swedish, and the national broadcaster, Yle, is publishing stories both in Swedish and Finnish. This story is from the Swedish Yle. And what is it about? It's about Swedish-speaking students get better grades than Finnish-speaking students when leaving high school. To explain this graph, blue is Finnish-speaking, yellow is Swedish-speaking. So the 3 columns to the right is showing that the Swedish-speaking students are much cleverer than the Finnish-speaking students. Finnish television, Yle, also made this data journalism story before the European election this spring. It's showing the differences between the parties regarding the sex of the candidates. As you can see in this graph, the Green Party has far more women at the list than the other parties. And the average age of the candidates is 45 years. After the general elections in Denmark this spring, the Danish broadcaster explained the results in a combination of mapping and short texts. This picture shows the classic way of doing it, and the text means, here is the election result as you used to see it. In this story, we investigate what is in the columns. And now I'm going to translate what is written. This map shows which parties had the greatest progress in the different constituencies. Translation, as you can see, this map is dominated by the Social Democrats and the Conservative Party. These 2 maps are showing the progress for the Socialist Party and the Radicals, and in which constituencies the right-wing Populist Party had the biggest decline. The new Prime Minister in Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, lives in the north, and at the top you can see her party, the Social Democrats, had progress in her part of the country. And one more Danish example. This project is from the Danish newspaper Politiken. It's a development of names given to Danish babies since 1900. The journalist who started with data journalism 5 years ago wanted to find out all he could about the names. He made his data among 7,764,507 given names to babies. When he had done the job, the readers could make historic lines for every name. This visualization is made in Flourish. And you could click at, the readers could click at each name. And here is one example, Anna. This name was popular many years ago, then not so popular, and now it has become popular again. And he also showed the development of different names from 1900 to last year, for girls and boys. And 131 names had been given every year since 1900. It's well known that many parents give the names to baby after celebrities and other well-known people. These two names are showing the use of Nikita and Lindy after Elton John had the hit Nikita in 1985. And after Charles Lindbergh was the first person to cross the Atlantic. I'll finish this presentation with two Norwegian examples. This is a story about Norwegian men buying access to see live sexual abuse of children in the Philippines. It's a very complicated use of methods. I'll only mention a couple of things. The users did not download anything on their own computers, and the journalists got access to the currency register. They made a FOIA request to get access to all transactions between Norway and Philippines between 5 and 40 euros. And there were around 6,000 such transactions in 2017. So they found Norwegian men by using this photo search. And in this metadata, they found the Norwegian man's SKUP account. And here's the girl they found. Her name is Rose. This is from the location where the abuses are happening. And this is a good example that data journalism is leading the journalists to stories they would not have been able to find without data journalism. This is from a regional newspaper south in Norway, Fedrelandsvennen. We had local elections in Norway this September, and the journalist in this newspaper came up with an idea to use this opportunity to do a big dive in a city by using statistical information. They built this story around the bus trip, and at each bus stop they made stories and published stats from that part of the city. Here they describe the project, meaning that bus number 19 is like a class travel. And there are big differences between the different parts of the city. And the readers could see this stat on paper and more on the web version. And they made also a quiz for every part of the city. They also found out that poverty among children is increasing. And finally, some words about my organization, SKUP. The SKUP award is the most prestigious award you can get in the Norwegian press. And when journalists and editors are competing to achieve the award, they send a report describing the methods they have been using. These reports are published at the SKUP homepage, so everybody can read it and learn from it. So if you are interested in learning something about Norwegian investigative methods, you can log into SKUP.no. Thank you.
Not over. I have a couple of more slides. Is that okay or no? Sorry, guys. The presentation was not over, and it's only 2 slides, but there are. Can you open the folder that you have? So maybe we can. So the other 2 examples are about the fires in the Amazon in Brazil, and so. Yes, this one. Yes, that one, because this one is cut. I don't know. So the Info Amazonia, it's a data journalism portal in Brazil, and so they have been tracking all the fires in the Amazon using satellite and NASA data, and combining it with local connections at the end. So, and Bloomberg, sorry? Yes, at the end, I need to just move it a little bit. Oh, that's the PowerPoint version. Okay.
Yeah, should be.
Okay. Well, and yeah. Okay, so that's yeah, there. So that's Bloomberg. Once we have the screen, and they also have been tracking the fires. Long story short, they found both examples. They found how the fires, this is the fire season in the Amazon, but this particular year, the situation is worse than ever. So fires increased 83% this year, and this is because of deforestation, which is the main. And as you know, President Bolsonaro is not particularly defending, the climate change, and so they were able also to correlate the source of most of these fires are people who own land and want to use it to grow soybeans, pretty much, and this is a practice that the government has been encouraging, or at least closing their eyes. And the last one was OCCRP. It's a story about it's another laundromat from. Okay, so this is Bloomberg. This is the story from Bloomberg using one kind of data and then info. It's okay. Okay, this is Bloomberg and this is Info Amazonia. So this interactive map has thousands and thousands of shares. Gustavo Faleiros, who's the author, has been updating, the information from satellite data from the NASA. And this is a CRP story, the Troika Laundromat. Well, this is a leak, but also they collected documents from multiple sources, and they were able to prove the millions of dollars were laundered through a bank, a Russian bank. And then this is the last one. This is the New York Times, and this is a very recent article published like a month ago. So using satellite data on ships And what I like is not only that, but also satellite pictures. Ships have usually a transmitter that sends every 5 minutes information, and then you collect all this data and you can track the routes of the ships. But sometimes they turn it off. And so that's a problem for those of us who like to work with this kind of data. And at first they were able to see the gaps of these 12 Iranian tankers under sanctions currently, and they were able to identify those gaps through satellite pictures and locate the ships in China. And so this is how they proved that China is helping Iran to avoid sanctions. And that was it. Thank you.
Okay, good news. I don't think I have too many slides to show. If I can get them up, I'll do that in a second. So I'm going to just briefly, I'm going to go through a couple of the things that where's my generic? There we go. There we go. Let's try that. Let's hope. So I'm based in South Africa. What does that mean? Oh, there we go. Start it. So one of the aspects of being in South Africa is that it's a relatively wealthy nation in a continent full of relatively poor nations, and we have particular conditions where, for example, a significant portion of the populations aren't online. So when we talk about data journalism, we typically imagine stuff that's online and kind of interactive, and certainly we have a lot of that going on, and I'll show you some of those examples. But we also have a very large portion of the population that are still very much paper-based, and not even, as you would imagine, cell phone-based. To give you context to this, South Africa officially has something in the region of 80 or 90% cell phone, close to 90% cell phone penetration, but actually only 50% of people have anywhere close to anything they could call real internet access on those phones. And in most cases, it's more that one person has more than one phone, so it skews the numbers even further. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples from the continent. One of the groups that's doing amazing work, I think, is Daily Nation in Kenya. New Nation's also doing fantastic work. They do a lot of their work in print. But they also occasionally kind of branch out and make a stab at making digital stuff. This, for example, Deadly Force, is a study that they used official data, human rights organizations' data, to track the police killings across Kenya over a period of a number of years. I think these two are cycling through 2018 and 2019. You can't see the full extent of this, but it's there's a dual approach here. One is that this is a database of information that they have on hand. To the right, over there, just to the right of the flashing numbers, that's a subset of this. What you can actually do is, for example, select a year, then click on one of those little human kind of silhouettes, and it'll pop up information about whatever information is available about that particular individual and their particular case. A lot of it's clearly unknown and there's missing data, but I mean, it's a stab at it. And kind of part of the process in this is there's an opportunity for people to submit information back to the database. What then happens is not only can you search this information just as a pure database, but then there's been over a series of months, they've been generating kind of infographics and stories out of this data set on an ongoing basis. So there's an online component and there's a print component. Some of these will obviously appear in both of them, but these sorts of infographics are mostly kind of for the print audiences that they have. I think New Nation and Daily Nation are well worth looking at for examples of what's going on in Africa in terms of data. They're quite advanced in data processing and data visualization. This one, quick disclaimer, I had a partial, very small amount of involvement in this, but I wanted to include this because I think this is an important idea in terms of how data is not just about telling a story, but can also have an impact back on the audience that it's reflecting. So Vimba Dipslut is a project in what is traditionally called a township just outside of my hometown of Johannesburg. It's literally like 50 kilometers away from us, probably 40 kilometers out of some of the richest areas in Johannesburg, and yet is the most densely populated and the poorest area, in one of the most poorest areas in the country. So what this project did was it was run by an NGO, a donor-funded organization that looks at health, and it was looking at the issues around gender violence in Diepsloot against women and children. And what they did is it was a dual process. So they set up what is an SMS-based, an SSD-based service where women or children or anyone connected with them who'd experienced violence, rape, beatings, whatever the case may be, could send a free, because it was sponsored, SMS to this line, and they would be directed to the nearest point of assistance. Because there's a number of operations inside Diepsloot that are working with women, trying to help them, secure them if they're under threat. The idea behind it was a completely free service. When it was first set up, the idea was we're going to have a WhatsApp and we're going to have an app and everything. And then the organizers realized that most people in that area had absolutely no access to the internet whatsoever. So the free SMS-based service. So essentially, you would send a message and say, "I need help." The response was, "What kind of help do you want? Send us a number. Have you been raped? Do you know somebody who's been raped?" Whatever. The important part about this is, one, it directs people to a service that they need. Two, we collected the data in the back end, which was then built into a data set around the different areas and where the violence was happening and the time of day, the type of violence that was happening, which was then fed back to the organizations working in that area, which helps them in the long term. This shows the very red large dot that got completely out of control. That's one of what's called an extension, essentially like a suburb inside Diepsloot. Diepsloot suburbs are very loosely formed. When the map was first initially created, there was no map. Actually, if you go on Google Earth, and you can actually see how the car drove towards the entrance of Diepsloot and then carried on driving, never actually went into the area. So there's actually no visuals inside there, and it's not formally documented. This is extension 1, where significant parts of the violence happened. And then there was data out of that was fed back to organizations. Becky Cisa, which is the organization, also works with the Melon Guardian, which is a print publication, primarily print publication in South Africa and relatively well known. And as a result, a lot of stories have come out of that. So there's been video content, there's been stories, infographics, that kind of thing. So it's kind of, again, it's the idea that we collect data, we build information on top of that data, use that data to both empower the people that we're covering and inform people around what's going on. So then to really run kind of the other extreme, Al Jazeera, I think, is doing amazing work at the moment. Death from Above is a story about the Saudi coalition bombing of Yemen. What Al Jazeera did was they looked at the data from March 2015 of the raids on Yemen over that period of time, which amounted to close to around 19,000 bombing raids against Yemen from March 2015 to January 2019. And then what they did, and I think we've seen this in other kind of variations on this in other places. One, they kind of mapped what the blocks on the right-hand side are day by day, the bombing raids. I don't know if this is going to work, but we'll give it a shot. I don't think, okay, it's not going to work. Anyway, so I'd advise you to look at it. There's a link on here if you want it. What they did is they created a video for each year. And then using sound, I think we've seen sonification in other sessions, people talking about the impact of sound. Basically, it plays sounds for every single time that a bomb is dropped on Yemen over the course of an entire year. And then the kind of video changes reflecting the severity of the attacks during that time. So I think it's a nice use of both visuals and sound to grasp the depth of the kind of what's going on there, and then the standard, the main areas, who controls what, that kind of thing. Conscious of time, I'll move along quickly. I mentioned the Melon Guardian before. The Melon Guardian is a publication in South Africa. What they did is they worked with a well-known legal firm in our country called Richard Spoor and Attorneys. And what the legal firm was doing was representing minors that had contracted silicosis as a result of working in mines. There was a protracted legal case between, I think it was 2012 until a judgment in 2016. And in 2016, the case concluded, and they were given the go-ahead for a class action suit against the mines, which ultimately, in theory, should be held responsible, and by law should be held responsible for the health of the workers that worked in their mines during this period. So they were given the go-ahead. The problem was then tracking down the individual miners in order to certify that they had been in those mines during that period, in their circumstances and their current conditions. It mounted to something like 15,000 miners across the country, not only across the country, but many had come from Zimbabwe and surrounding areas. What the entire process involved getting the documentation, which at one point I heard a developer saying was something like they were trying to digitize it. It was coming in boxes of 25 boxes a day of like 50 records at a time. They were trying to scan them and digitize them. They ultimately digitized this and then built a representation of like the primary areas where these miners with silicosis had worked and where they were located. Again, there was a print component down the right-hand side. You can see they pulled out those elements for their print story, and then did basic kind of mapping around which were the areas. Masiri, which is Lesotho, which is not technically South Africa. It's a landlocked country inside of South Africa, strangely enough, but there we go. So, I mean, that's another use of kind of like you're taking an existing thing and turning it into something that people can kind of grasp and understand. And the digitization process was important. And I think this is my last one, so we'll go to questions in a minute. The shifting sands, Nigeria, particularly Lagos. This is a story about Lagos. The one thing I discovered through this is the value of sand. Sand is incredibly valuable, particularly in the building industries, and has, in worldwide, is becoming something of a kind of almost a black market. What's happening in Lagos is that there's operators, illegal operators, basically dredging every waterway for the kind of building sand that's required by industry, basically kind of criminals. And in the process, they're devastating populations that are built on and around. Many of the populations in Lagos are actually kind of built kind of right on the edge of the water, or even floating on the water. Many of them have a livelihood which depends on being able to grow food around those. But the kind of the erosion of sand. So what they did is they went around and they looked at the various areas in there and spoke to the individuals and looked at some of the numbers. I think Nigeria, it's like almost 50%, which is good. It's an improvement. 50% of people live in informal settlements, and many of these are in these waterways that are being heavily affected by the sand erosion. It's an extended story. It's more a visual story than a data story per se, but I thought it was interesting, particularly as this particular story used, I think many people may know African Drone Project, but it's a relatively new project that does a lot of drone work. And in this particular case, if you actually look at the story, it's got some fantastic visuals of before and after in some of these regions devastated by the sand theft. And a quote here about one of the people who said they used to plant maize and cassava, but now they kind of daily get washed away because of the erosion. There's a number of drone. I like the drone footage because I think it gives you a real like before and after context of how devastating this actually can be. And then there's some basic kind of these are the primary areas where people are dredging sand and eroding the livelihood of many people. And I think that's pretty much it for me. So, we do have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions or anything.
Hi, I just want to ask, when you're doing your stories on data stories and data visualizations, do you take into consideration the platform you're publishing on? For example, do you prioritize how it will look like in a mobile version or in a desktop version? Because I did some visualizations in the past and I always had a hard time making sure that the presentation and the desktop will be presented better or clearer in the mobile version, especially with the different aspects of the mobile phones. Thank you.
Certainly, I mean that's both the best part and the hardest part of data visualization to me is that need to kind of cater for both those platforms, because it feels like it's beautiful in desktop, but it doesn't work in mobile. I actually found that I started increasingly kind of working around the mobile version initially. I think that you have to these days, and sometimes you can actually get better results out of it, I find, focusing on the mobile one and then scaling it up. and kind of rather like starting with something simple and then adding context for the desktop version, perhaps. I don't know if anyone else. No. Okay.
Hi. Sure. Thank you. Hi there. I noticed in a lot of the stories you all put forward, it seemed like they leaned heavily on satellite imagery. So I'm curious if that's something you see as kind of a growing trend, and also if there are particular tools that you see people having a lot of success with or tools or databases for going from the world of pictures to the world of stories with satellite imagery. Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the trends that you can easily notice. Increasingly, we have more and more stories combining, relational data or traditional data sets with satellite images. And the reason is we have much more sources for that. For instance, planet.com is one of those sources, and they claim that they have a picture of every corner, an image of every corner of the planet every 5 minutes. And they have historical satellite images. So for instance, in Venezuela, a group of colleagues are identifying potential uranium enrichment plants by Iran, but using this kind of technology. The example I just showed, the New York Times, filling the gaps with satellite images. So it's the fact that we have access to, and remember that it's not just the image, but also some of them have additional value, like measuring temperature, for instance, for climate change and all these topics. And some sensors can even identify the kind of forest that, and it depends on the satellite image, but all this, by the way, planet.com has a professional version, and for journalists and people working in academia, they can give it for free, so you have to apply it. There's a link in their website.
You don't have to pay for it, so I don't feel bad plugging it, and we are at GIJN. We have a satellite guide, which is fairly extensive on the various tools that are available. If you go on the GIJN Resource Center, you're bound to find it somewhere in there. I can't remember exactly where. But it is a fairly extensive listing of resources for satellite. But you're right. I mean, I think it's incredibly important. And we are seeing, I think the most exciting part is that these new technologies are coming out where they can kind of, building sensors that can sense, kind of, as you say, temperature and vegetation and kind of landforms almost automatically. I think those are the things to watch out for.
Hi, I was wondering what are your advices to make sure that people can get what we're showing? Because many times as we see it, because we understand the information, is easier to understand what's happening in those maps. But many times, like regular audience, it's not gonna get the information as we want to. And it's like, you need to be sure that there are like more ways to connect with the audience. Like the other day, I just met this project from these Colombian guys. They're doing T-shirts with the data, and they show it in different colors. So you can see easily, for instance, how many girls got medical care when they were raped or not, you know? So is there like advices you can give us to make sure we're doing it the right way to show our data?
Yes, that's a great question, and I think we all should be concerned about that because, you know, all the effort that we put in, everybody in working in these kind of projects, and if people are not really, processing it, then. And I have a good example that I did not include here, although to me is one of my favorites. It's a podcast called In the Dark. I don't know if you have. No one would say that this is a data journalism story, so they went and documented all the there's a racist judge in a small town in the south of the U.S., and so they documented every time that he had to choose the jury and how biased he was. And they took one particular case, which is a guy who has been convicted 7 times because of this bias in the jury. But you cannot see the data work. The story is so well communicated and exposed that it's not. So I think it's just one of many examples. Some other people are using, humor, even theater. So I think that definitely we need to think about other ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think it goes to the heart of what we actually have to do. So you actually need to understand which audience you're appealing to and talk to them. I mean, part of one of the projects I talk about, the Becky Cecil one, which is about the woman in Tipsheets and stuff, part of that process, we didn't necessarily put out the data per se, but we made people aware of the service through painting on walls and things like that. Like, we got community members involved in that kind of process, where they went out and actually kind of decorated things, painted walls with information and stuff like that. But I think you're right. I mean, it depends. If your audience is sitting in a city with high speed access, that you're fine, but get it on a T. I love that idea of a T-shirt. I think it's fantastic. I want to try that more often, but it's about understanding your audience and how you actually communicate them. I said to you when we went into Dipslet, the idea was people were going to go, like, we're going to have a smartphone and people are going to have an app and stuff like that. But actually, sometimes it takes, go and sit with the audience and actually talk to them and realize that they spend a fraction of a cent a day on data, and they can't kind of be frivolous with that. So they need that kind of some other mechanism to interact with it.
Like in Venezuela, for instance, there's a group of journalists who are telling the stories in buses. They jump in a bus and tell the story.
That's great. Okay, any more questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, and you.
Thank you
Very much.